I never thought it would come to this, sitting here now replaying every decision that led me to this point. I can still hear the sound of Mark's suitcase zipping shut. That sound used to mean security, a man providing for his family, chasing his dreams. Now it felt like the sound of a door closing on us. Mark had always been a man of ambition, and I admired that about him. When we met, his drive and charm swept me off my feet, but over the years, his ambition turned into endless business trips and late-night meetings. He'd come home exhausted, with barely enough energy for a kiss on the cheek or a half-hearted conversation about my day. "You'll be okay, right?" he asked, looking at me with those tired blue eyes as he threw his laptop bag over his shoulder. I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course I'll be fine. But I wasn't fine. The house felt like a museum when he was gone, silent and full of reminders of the life we used to have. I walked past pictures of us on the walls, our wedding day smiles frozen in time, and wonder where it all went wrong. That's when Jacob started coming around. Jacob had been Mark's best friend since college. He was the best man at our wedding and a constant presence in our lives. Where Mark was reserved and methodical, Jacob was warm, spontaneous, and just there. It started innocently enough. He'd stop by to check on me when Mark was away, bringing takeout or a bottle of wine. "Can't let you sit here all alone," he'd say with that boyish grin that made it hard to say no. First, I appreciated the company. We'd sit on the couch, sharing stories and laughing about the old days when life seemed simpler. But as time went on, I found myself looking forward to his visits in a way I shouldn't have. He noticed things Mark hadn't in years. When I got a new haircut, how I rearranged the living room, the perfume I wore. "You deserve to feel seen, Emily," he said one evening, his voice low and sincere. My heart raced at the way he looked at me, like I was the only woman in the world. I should have stopped it there. I should have told him to leave and never come back. But the truth is, I didn't want him to leave. The night it all began, Mark had been gone for almost a week. Jacob showed up unannounced, carrying a bottle of my favorite red wine. "Thought you could use a little company," he said. I hesitated for a moment but opened the door wide enough for him to step inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the wine loosening our tongues. He told me about his frustrations at work, how he felt like he was always in Mark's shadow. I told him how lonely I was, how it felt like Mark loved his job more than he loved me. Somewhere between the second and third glass, the conversation shifted. Jacob reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't have to feel this way." I should have pulled my hand back, but I didn't. Instead, I let him hold it, let him trace small circles on my palm as my defenses crumbled. When he leaned in, I didn't stop him. His lips were warm, his touch electrifying. For the first time in years I felt wanted. That night, I crossed a line I could never uncross. The guilt hit me like a freight train the next morning. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Mark, about the vows we'd made and the life we'd built. But when I looked over at Jacob, still asleep beside me, a part of me didn't regret it. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the way he made me feel alive again. And so, I let it continue. Looking back now, I can see the cracks in my marriage were already there, but I was the one who widened them. I told myself it was just a distraction, something to fill the void while Mark was away. But deep down I knew it was more than that. I didn't realize how dangerous it was until it was too late. If you're as hooked as I was on the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping tales of love and consequences. I know what you're thinking. How could I let it happen again? After that first night with Jacob, I told myself it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment fueled by loneliness and wine. I swore it wouldn't happen again. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain. Jacob became my escape from the emptiness of my marriage. Mark's absence left a void, and Jacob filled it effortlessly. He made me laugh, he listened, and he reminded me of the woman I used to be. The one who wasn't just a wife waiting for her husband to come home. It started small, a stolen kiss here, a lingering touch there, but the more time we spent together, the harder it became to resist. The guilt that had clung to me after that first night began to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: passion. One afternoon, Jacob called me while I was cleaning the house. "Come over," he said, his voice low and inviting. "I can't stop thinking about you." I hesitated. "Jacob, we shouldn't." "I know," he interrupted, "but I need to see you." I told myself I was just going to talk to him to set boundaries. But the moment I stepped into his apartment and he pulled me into his arms, every thought of stopping vanished. That day, something shifted between us. It wasn't just about filling the void anymore. It was about the way he made me feel, seen, heard, and desired. With Jacob, I wasn't just Mark's wife. I was Emily, alive, vibrant, and wanted. We began to steal moments wherever we could. Late-night phone calls, hurried afternoons in his apartment, whispered confessions of longing. It felt like a whirlwind, like we were the only two people in the world. But the deeper I fell into Jacob's arms, the harder it became to ignore the guilt gnawing at the edges of my happiness. Every time I heard Mark's voice on the phone or saw his name pop up on my screen, I felt a pang of shame. He was out there working hard for our future, while I was destroying it behind his back. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" I asked Jacob one night as we lay tangled in his sheets. "All the time," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "But I also know I can't stop. I don't want to stop." His words should have scared me, but instead they thrilled me. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was choosing me, putting me first. But it couldn't last. I knew that. And soon, the fragile world we built would come crashing down. It started with a phone call from Mark. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice unusually cheerful. "Guess what? My meeting tomorrow got cancelled. I'm coming home early." My heart stopped. "Oh, that's great," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "I thought you'd be happy," he said. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," I lied. Hanging up the phone, I felt like the walls were closing in. Mark would be home in less than 24 hours, and everything I'd been hiding would be under the same roof. The next day was a blur of panic and preparation. I scrubbed the house from top to bottom, erasing every trace of Jacob's presence. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something would slip through the cracks. That evening, as I sat waiting for Mark's arrival, my phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. "I can't stop thinking about you," it read. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I wanted to respond, to tell him I felt the same. But before I could type a reply, the sound of the front door opening froze me in place. "Emily," Mark's voice called out. I quickly deleted the message and stood to greet him, plastering a smile on my face. "Welcome home." But as I hugged him, I couldn't ignore the knot of fear tightening in my chest. Do secrets ever stay buried? What happens next will change everything. Like and subscribe to see how this story unfolds and to hear more tales of heartbreak and redemption. When Mark walked through the door, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground beneath me to crumble. His face lit up when he saw me, and for a moment, I wondered if I could still pull this off, if I could pretend everything was fine. "Hey," Mark said, dropping his bag by the door and wrapping me in a warm hug. "I missed you." "I missed you too," I lied, my voice trembling just enough to make me wonder if he noticed. He didn't seem to, but I felt like a spotlight had been turned on me. Every word I said, every move I made felt like it was being scrutinized. I couldn't help but wonder. Did I clean well enough? Did I erase every trace of Jacob? The evening started off uneventful. Mark unpacked while I cooked dinner, the usual routine we fell into whenever he came back from a trip. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we sat down to eat, Mark looked at me and smiled. "The house looks great," he said. "You've been busy." "Yeah," I replied, lying, forcing a laugh. "Had to keep myself occupied while you were gone." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, as if he was trying to read my mind. I quickly changed the subject, asking him about his trip, and for a while things felt normal. But then it happened. After dinner, Mark went into the bedroom to grab his phone charger. I didn't think much of it until I heard him call out, "Emily, can you come here for a second?" My heart sank. I walked into the bedroom, trying to keep my face neutral. Mark was standing by the dresser, holding something in his hand, something small and silver. My bracelet. The one Jacob had given me, engraved with a date that wasn't my wedding anniversary. "Where did this come from?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. "Oh, that," I stammered, my mind racing for an explanation. "It's just something I picked up." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it doesn't look like anything you'd buy for yourself. And the date, what does this mean?" I felt my face flush as panic set in. "It's nothing," I said quickly, "just a random date." "Don't lie to me, Emily," he snapped, his voice rising. "I've seen you wearing this before, and I didn't think much of it, but now I want the truth." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Mark's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at it, and I knew immediately who it was. "Jacob." Mark picked up the phone, his jaw tightening as he read the message. Then, without a word, he turned the screen toward me. "Jacob, I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" The world seemed to stop. My heart pounded in my chest as Mark stared at me, his face a mix of hurt and anger. "Last night," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've been seeing him while I was gone." "Mark, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really?" he said, throwing the phone onto the bed. "Then what is it, Emily? Because it sure as hell looks like you've been sleeping with my best friend." I didn't know what to say. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Mark paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "How long?" he demanded. "How long has this been going on?" "Just a few weeks," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Few weeks? Unbelievable." "Mark, I'm sorry," I said, reaching for him, but he pulled away. "Don't," he said coldly. "You don't get to apologize for this. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me. To us." His words cut deeper than I thought possible. I tried to explain, to tell him how lonely I'd been, how I felt like he'd abandoned me. But every excuse sounded hollow, even to me. "I gave everything for this marriage," he said, his voice breaking. "I worked my ass off so we could have a future, and this is how you repay me." "I never meant to hurt you," I said, sobbing. "I was just so lost." "In Jacob," he spat, his face twisting in anger. "Of all people you chose him, my best friend." The room fell silent except for my muffled cries. Mark stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "I can't do this," he said finally. "I can't even look at you right now." With that, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door, leaving me alone with my guilt and the wreckage of everything we'd built together. When Mark slammed the door behind him, the silence that followed was deafening. I sank onto the bed, clutching the bracelet in my hand like it could somehow turn back time. My chest ached with a mixture of shame, regret, and fear. He was gone, my husband, my rock. And for what? A fleeting thrill with Jacob. I tried calling him once, twice, 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. "Mark, please," I begged through the recording. "Come home. Let's talk. I'll explain everything." But what was there to explain? The truth was already out, laid bare like an open wound.